Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today, we're going deep into a process that's happening all around us, literally all the time, and that's photosynthesis. We all know the basics, right? Plants use sunlight to make their own food. But the research paper you sent over, Photosynthesis by Matthew P. Johnson, it really reveals just how much more is going on beneath the surface.
You know, what's so fascinating to me about photosynthesis is that it's not just about plants making food, it's really the basis for pretty much all life on Earth. I
Yeah.
mean, think about it. It's the reason we have oxygen to breathe. It's the energy flowing through ecosystems, even the fossil fuels we rely on. They're all just stored sunlight, and it's all thanks to photosynthesis.
Okay, so let's break this down a bit. We know that plants take in carbon dioxide and water, they harness light energy, and out comes sugar and oxygen. But the big question is how? How do they actually pull off this incredible energy conversion?
Well, the paper explains it really well. It's all about this amazing interplay between light and molecules. It's like a two-part performance, and it all starts with the light reactions.
The light reactions, huh? So this is where the sunlight actually comes into play, like the engine room of the whole process.
Exactly. Picture tiny solar panels inside every single leaf, capturing light energy. These are called photosystems specifically, photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. And they each play a crucial role in converting that light energy into a form the plant can actually use.
Photosystem 2, photosystem, it sounds a bit technical. What are the key differences between the two?
We'll think of photosystem 2, or we can call it PSII for short, as the water splitter. It's the only enzyme on Earth that can actually use light energy to split water molecules. And that reaction, that's absolutely essential for life as we know it.
The only enzyme. That's a bold statement. What makes this reaction so unique?
It's pretty amazing when you think about it. PSII absorbs light energy and uses it to break apart those water molecules. And a byproduct of that process, oxygen. So every breath you take, you're experiencing the power of PSII in action.
Wow, so the oxygen we breathe is a direct result of this water splitting process. That's kind of mind-blowing.
It really is. And along with that oxygen, PSII also releases electrons. You can think of them like tiny packets of energy. And these electrons, they don't just hang around, they're immediately put to work in something called the electron transport chain.
Ah, the electron transport chain. I vaguely remember this from biology class. It's like a cellular relay race, passing energy from one molecule to the next.
You got it. These electrons are passed down a chain of molecules, and with each transfer, a bit of energy is released. This energy is used to pump protons across a membrane, and that creates a difference in charge, like a biological battery, if you will.
So we're storing up energy, kind of like creating this proton power source. But what happens to those electrons? Where do they go next?
Okay, so that's where photosystem I comes in, or PSI. Those electrons, after traveling down the chain, they're a bit depleted, you could say. And PSI, it re-energizes them using another dose of light energy. And now, these re-energized electrons, they have a very important job. They power the creation of NADPH.
NADPH. Now that's another energy carrier, if I'm not mistaken.
You are absolutely correct. And all that stored energy in our proton battery, remember that. Well, that's harnessed by an amazing enzyme called ATP synthase. And this enzyme produces, you guessed it, ATP. That's the universal energy currency of cells.
Right, ATP, the fuel that powers basically everything that happens in a cell. So now we've got these energized molecules, ATP and NADPH, ready to work. But how do they actually help build those complex sugars?
Okay, well, that's where the Calvin-Benson cycle comes in. You might also hear it called the dark reactions, though light-independent reactions is actually more accurate.
Light-independent reactions. So they don't need darkness to occur, but they're not directly powered by light either?
Exactly. The Calvin-Benson cycle uses that energy we just talked about from ATP and NADPH that were generated in those light reactions to power a whole series of chemical reactions. And this is where carbon dioxide from the atmosphere really comes into play. It's transformed from an inorganic gas into, well, the building blocks of life.
Wow, so this is where carbon is actually captured and used to build those essential sugar molecules.
That's it. And here's the amazing part. This intricate cycle, it's not a one-time deal. The Calvin-Benson cycle is this beautifully designed look, and it's constantly regenerating its starting molecules, so the process just keeps going and going. Continuous carbon fixation and sugar production, it's really quite elegant.
Elegant and efficient. But the paper also mentions something called photorespiration. That almost sounds like a hiccup in the process, am I right?
Yeah, you could say it's a bit of a quirk. Yeah. Remember Rubisco, the enzyme we talked about earlier? The one responsible for capturing carbon dioxide in the Calvin-Benson cycle.
Right, Rubisco plays a key role in fixing carbon. What's the issue with it?
Well, it turns out Rubisco isn't always perfect.
Mm,
Sometimes, instead of grabbing carbon dioxide, it accidentally picks up oxygen.
oxygen. But there's oxygen everywhere. What happens when that occurs?
Well, this little misstep, it leads to a less efficient process called photorespiration. And this actually wastes energy and can reduce the plant's overall productivity. It's kind of like an evolutionary hangover, you could say, a consequence of Rubisco's origins way back when the atmosphere had a very different composition.
Fascinating. So, how have plants adapted to overcome this photorespiration challenge? I mean, have they evolved any clever ways to avoid this energy wasting mistake?
Oh, absolutely. And this is where things get really interesting. Some plants have evolved these amazing ways to concentrate carbon dioxide around Rubisco, minimizing the chances of it grabbing oxygen instead. And these clever plants, they're known as C4 and CAM, plants the efficiency experts of the plant world.
C4 and CAM plants, they sound like something out of a sci-fi movie. What makes these plants so special?
Well, they've developed these incredible adaptations to thrive in specific environments. C4 plants, like corn or sugarcane, have this unique leaf structure and biochemistry that allows them to concentrate carbon dioxide right around Rubisco. They're basically minimizing photorespiration and maximizing sugar production.
So they've essentially engineered a way to make their photosynthesis more efficient. Incredible. And what about those CAM plants? The paper mentioned cacti and succulents. How do they handle those dry environments?
CAM plants are fascinating. They've got their own strategy. They're all about conserving water and grabbing carbon dioxide when it's most advantageous. You see, they actually open their stomata, those tiny pores on leaves, at night.
At night. Why would they do that?
Well, it's cooler and more humid at night. They take in carbon dioxide then, and they convert it into a storage form.
So they stock up on carbon dioxide overnight like a late night grocery run?
Exactly. And then during the day, when the sun's blazing and they need to keep those stomata closed to avoid losing water, they use that stored CO2 to fuel the Calvin-Benson cycle. Talk about adaptation.
Wow. It's just amazing how plants have developed all these different strategies, all to maximize their efficiency and thrive in different environments. It really speaks to the power of natural selection. But this research paper is from 2016. Have there been any new discoveries in photosynthesis since then?
Oh, are you kidding? Photosynthesis research is constantly evolving. For example, scientists are now looking at, get this, the quantum mechanics of photosynthesis.
Quantum mechanics, that sounds incredibly complex. What have they found?
Well, it turns out those energy transfer processes within the light harvesting complexes we talked about earlier, they might be even more efficient than we ever imagined. We're talking near-perfect energy transfer, all thanks to the mind-boggling world of quantum mechanics.
So those antenna pigments, they're not just funneling energy, they're doing it with quantum precision. That's incredible. It makes you wonder, could we ever harness this kind of power for ourselves?
That, my friend, is the million-dollar question. Researchers are really interested in something called artificial photosynthesis. The idea is to essentially mimic nature's blueprint to create clean energy and sustainable fuels.
Like artificial leaves that can capture sunlight and create fuel directly? That would be revolutionary.
Exactly. Imagine a world powered by artificial photosynthesis. We could directly convert sunlight into fuel, just like plants. It's a really exciting possibility, and the research is definitely moving in a promising direction.
It's incredible how by exploring something like photosynthesis, it opens up a world of possibilities, from understanding how life began to maybe even tackling some of our biggest global challenges.
Absolutely. And it just goes to show how important this process really is. I mean,
Okay.
it's everything from the air we breathe to the future of our planet.
Speaking of the future, I'm curious, how could climate change impact this process that's so vital to us? I mean, on one hand, more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere sounds like it could be a good thing for plants, right? They need it for photosynthesis.
It's definitely complex, with lots of factors to consider. Some research suggests that having more CO2 could actually boost plant growth, at least at first. It's called the CO2 fertilization effect. But like a lot of things in nature, there's a catch.
There's always a catch. What are the potential downsides?
Well, that CO2 boost, it might not last. See, with climate change, temperatures are rising and weather patterns are becoming less predictable. So even with more CO2, the increasing heat, droughts, and even nutrient imbalances could actually offset those initial benefits to plants. It's kind of like giving your plants a big growth spurt and then forgetting to water them.
Not a recipe for success. So even though more CO2 sounds good on the surface, the reality is much more complicated.
Exactly. And then there's the question of how different types of plants will react. Will C4 plants, like corn, outcompete those C3 plants in a world with even more CO2? How will forests and other ecosystems adapt? These are all questions that researchers are trying to answer, and they have big implications for agriculture, biodiversity, the whole carbon cycle, really.
It's amazing how we've gone from talking about the molecular machinery of photosynthesis to the fate of entire forests and ecosystems. It really highlights just how interconnected everything is.
And that's what's so fascinating about this deep dive. By understanding photosynthesis at its core, you can start to appreciate just how profound its impact is on the entire world, from the air we breathe to, like you said, the future of the planet.
It really is a humbling thought. Every breath we take is a testament to this ancient process that continues to shape our world in ways we are only just beginning to understand.
And that, my friend, is the perfect note to end on. Join us next time as we delve even deeper into this incredible world of photosynthesis.
It's mind-blowing to think that this one process, photosynthesis, is responsible for so much of life on Earth as we know it. Before we were talking about rising CO2 levels, and it sounds like there's a lot more to the story.
Oh, absolutely. It's easy to think more CO2, more fuel for plants, right? But nature is never that simple. Imagine you give a plant tons of sunlight, plenty of CO2, water, the works, but you completely forget about the soil, the temperature, the nutrients. Sure, it might grow really fast at first, but in the long run, it's not going to be healthy or sustainable. It's the same idea with CO2.
So it's not just about cranking up the CO2. What other things do we need to think about when we talk about plants and climate change?
You hit the nail on the head. Temperature is a big one. We touched on how C4 plants, like corn, have those cool adaptations for hotter environments, while other plants, like a lot of our staple crops, don't.
As the planet heats up, we might see some plants doing really well and others not so much. And that could have huge impacts on things like food security and biodiversity.
That makes a lot of sense. If C4 plants are more efficient in higher temperatures, does that mean they could have an advantage in a warmer world? It's possible, and researchers are studying it right now. Some studies are showing that C4 plants could spread to new areas or become even more productive with more CO2 and warmer temperatures. But ecosystems are incredibly complex, and trying to predict what will happen in the long term, well, that's really tough.
So it's not just about individual plants, it's about how entire ecosystems might change.
Exactly. Think about forests. Trees are all competing for the same resources: light, water, nutrients. So even if more CO2 helps some trees grow faster, it can throw off the whole balance of the forest. Over time, the types of trees in a forest, even the structure of the forest itself, could change.
That makes me think about those amazing redwood forests. Could climate change impact even those giants?
It is definitely a concern. Redwoods depend on a specific climate to do well, especially that coastal fog. If temperatures...
It's really humbling when you realize how interconnected all of this is. We started with tiny molecules involved in photosynthesis, and now we're talking about the fate of entire forests.
It all comes back to that fundamental process happening in every leaf. Photosynthesis isn't just some abstract concept. It's the air we breathe, the food we eat, the stability of our climate. It affects everything.
You know, when you learn about something as intricate and elegant as photosynthesis, you can't help but wonder, could we ever harness that power ourselves? Could we use what we know about photosynthesis to develop clean energy?
Well, you're in luck, because that's exactly what scientists working on artificial photosynthesis are trying to do. They want to create artificial systems that can capture sunlight, just like plants, and use it to create sustainable fuel.
It sounds like something out of Star Trek. What are some of the challenges in trying to make artificial photosynthesis a reality?
One of the biggest hurdles is figuring out how to replicate the incredible complexity of natural photosynthesis. Plants have had millions of years to perfect this process, fine-tuning every single step. So trying to recreate that level of sophistication in a lab, that's a tall order.
So it's not enough to understand the individual parts. You have to recreate the entire orchestra, so to speak.
Exactly. Think about that elegant electron transport chain, the precision of the Calvin-Benson cycle. To recreate those artificially, you need a deep understanding of biochemistry, material science, you name it.
It sounds like there are a lot of challenges. What are some of the most promising areas of research in artificial photosynthesis?
One really cool area is the development of bio-inspired materials. Researchers are turning to nature for inspiration, designing materials that act like the light-harvesting molecules in plants or the enzymes that help with those chemical reactions.
So instead of trying to perfectly copy nature, we're learning from it and adapting those principles.
Exactly. It's about understanding the core principles of photosynthesis and using that knowledge to design new solutions. For example, some scientists are using nanomaterials, really, really tiny materials, to mimic how plant cells capture light. That could lead to super efficient solar cells.
That's fascinating. So we're not just talking about recreating photosynthesis, but using it to spark innovation in all sorts of fields.
You got it. That's the power of scientific research. When we delve into the mysteries of nature, you never know what we might discover or how it might change the world.
It's amazing to think that by better understanding how plants make energy, we might unlock the key to a more sustainable future for everyone.
Absolutely. And it just goes to show how important basic research really is. Sometimes the most groundbreaking discoveries come from exploring the unknown, even if we don't know what we'll find.
It's really exciting to think about the potential of artificial photosynthesis, but as we've been discussing, there's still so much we can learn from the real deal. This research paper has been amazing. It's really opened my eyes to just how intricate natural photosynthesis really is.
And we're just scratching the surface. Every time I dig into the research on photosynthesis, I'm amazed by how much we're still learning. It's like uncovering the secret language of life.
It really makes you wonder, what are some of the big unanswered questions in photosynthesis research? What are scientists focusing on these days?
One thing that really fascinates researchers is trying to understand the evolutionary history of photosynthesis. Like, how did this incredible process even begin billions of years ago? What were those key moments in evolution that led to the diversity of photosynthetic life we see today?
It's incredible to think about those early days on Earth, those first single-celled organisms figuring out how to use sunlight. It's like trying to picture the invention of the wheel, but on a microscopic level.
That's a great analogy. And just like the wheel changed human civilization, photosynthesis completely transformed our planet. And it's not just about energy, it's about the air we breathe. Photosynthesis literally created the atmosphere as we know it, paving the way for all oxygen-dependent life, including us.
Wow, that really puts things into perspective. From the tiniest leaf to the atmosphere, it all comes back to this one process.
And that leads us to what might be the most important question of all. How will photosynthesis shape the future of our planet as our climate changes?
We've talked about how it might impact plants, forests, agriculture, but what about the bigger picture? How does photosynthesis fit into the global carbon cycle and climate change?
Photosynthesis is a key player in regulating Earth's climate. Every year, photosynthetic organisms pull billions of tons of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And they're like this giant carbon sink.
So they're naturally helping to offset some of the excess carbon dioxide that humans are releasing.
Exactly. But the big question is, can this natural system keep up as we pump more and more CO2 into the atmosphere? And like we've talked about, climate change itself can mess with how efficient photosynthesis is, which creates this complicated feedback loop.
It's like this delicate balancing act, trying to maintain equilibrium as things change faster than ever.
That's a great way to put it. And that's why understanding photosynthesis is more important than ever. It's not just biology anymore. It's climate science, it's ecology, it's even engineering as we explore artificial photosynthesis. It's a field that's bursting with potential for discovery and innovation.
This has been an amazing journey, diving deep into this process that we often take for granted. We've gone from the nitty-gritty details of photosystems to the global carbon cycle, and it's clear that we still have so much more to learn.
That's the beauty of science. It's a never-ending quest for knowledge. Every answer leads to more questions, and it keeps pushing us forward.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the fascinating world of photosynthesis. We hope you've gained a new appreciation for how powerful and incredible this process really is.
And remember, the next time you see a plant, take a moment to think about the amazing things happening inside it. It's a great reminder that even the smallest things can be incredibly complex and amazing.
Well said. That's all the time we have for today, but we'll be back next time with another deep dive into a fascinating topic. Until then, keep those questions coming.